More people are going to land their dream career with wildlife in the next few years than they have in all of human history. If you do what other wildlife professionals do, you eventually get the same result. Here at the Practical Animal Channel, we interview wildlife professionals in order to document their rise to success and the roadmap of their careers. We then bring that blueprint to you. Watch this video for an excellent summary of what it takes to be a wildlife research biologist working on bobcats. So, if career success for you means working with wildcats, how do you get there? Cheryl Mollohan has a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Biology and a Master of Science in Environmental Resources, both from Arizona State University. While in Arizona, where she started her career, she researched black bears and wild turkeys and worked with teachers and Project Wild. Prior to returning to Arizona in 2018, after a 20-plus year stint in Ohio, she taught at Hocking College in the Wildlife Resources Program for 11 years and volunteered with the Ohio Division of Wildlife on a 3-year bobcat study in southeastern Ohio. She is continuing work on the Allegheny wood rat, the rarest and most endangered mammal in Ohio, as well as conducting firefly research here in Arizona. In 2020, Cheryl and a group of retired Arizona game and fish biologists were awarded a heritage grant from the Arizona Game and Fish Department to conduct a study in association with the Southwest Wildlife Conservation Center on bobcats living along the urban wildlands interface of Tucson. 57 urban wildcats were captured and 38 were radio collared, providing over 53,000 satellite bobcat locations over 4 years. In 2022, Cheryl began working on a bobcat social interaction study in southeastern Ohio, which continues today. If you are learning English as a second language, this video will be useful because you will hear two accents, a British and an American one. And before we go any further, I would like to say thank you to my subscribers. Without you, there would be no channel. Working in bobcat ecology and living the wild life looks like this. What jobs are there with bobcats?
Two come to mind immediately. The first one is as a research biologist, obviously, if there is research to be done on bobcats or any. And then the other place that there are jobs are in management. So most states, bobcats have repopulated. They lived pretty much north to south, east to west in every state in the United States, down into Mexico, and they go to the north until they get to the boreal forest. And at that point in time, Canada lynx kind of fill the niche that bobcats fill otherwise, but extremely widespread common animal. And they were eliminated from almost all of their eastern habitats by about 1850, 1875. And they started to repopulate, probably about 30 years ago now, as habitat returned and some of the persecution stopped because they were really persecuted, like most carnivores in the United States during European settlement. And they have since repopulated. Almost every state has bobcats now, so they repopulated all of their original habitat except where there is development. And so most states have a predator or carnivore fur bearer biologist position, which is a management position for bobcats. They are, in most cases, in most states, hunted and trapped. So they are a managed animal from a wildlife conservation standpoint. Those are probably the two primary jobs that present themselves as far as work with bobcats. Really work with carnivores in general, but work with bobcats for sure. The fur bearer biologist is going to manage the population, and within that, the two primary management efforts that occur with bobcats are harvest related, which is um, most states allow trapping of bobcats, foothold trapping of bobcats, or cage trapping of bobcats. And most states have a hunting season for bobcats. So that person is responsible for that management, making those management decisions. So it could be, setting a season, it could be in some states, there are quotas where you can only kill so many or remove so many, and then the season's closed. So they do that. They also, in many cases, gather research data or interpret research data. Um, uh, some depending on the state and depending on what's going on that state, that there are other activities related, which might have to do with surveying, trying to get a feel for how many there are, what kind of population there is. All of those activities pretty typically fall under that, either as a research person or as a management person. Those are the two primary places that occurs. Carnivores in general are so much different from a management standpoint than something like an herbivore. They're much more difficult to manage. There's much more involved, and then also part of that is just, you know, human interactions and issues that come up with people. Sometimes it's a conflict that has to do, like we dealt with in Tucson, which was domestic livestock. We had two of our bobcats, in two of our radio bobcats that we know of for sure that were killed because they were stalking chickens in on people's properties. So there's lots of times with carnivores, there's conflict. It's just part of the game. It just is. It goes with the territory. And I think it's an interest thing too. Some people, I was always super interested in carnivores. I'm a cat person through and through. So, getting to work on any wildcat was always really a lifetime dream of mine. It took me a long time to get here. I'll tell you a quick story. Um, so my very first summer job I'm aging myself here. My very first summer job was in 1979, so 46 years ago, and it was on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and I was a summer student, intern with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. And I was helping on a mule deer mountain lion study because there was a lot of concern that lions were eating all of the deer. And this particular group of deer happened to be world-class, huge mule deer, genetically large antlers and huge mule deer. And so as part of that study, I was catching deer and putting radio collars on deer. But as part of that study, the last day I was there, the supervisor, who turned into a lifelong friend and mentor, who was the lion biologist, caught a mountain lion, and I got to help put the radio collar on and handle it and touch it and all of that. And it was, I was 20 years old. So that was a profound experience, and have not worked on lions since then. And last week, when we were over in the other area that we were working, which is over by the Grand Canyon, we found a cache. So when lions kill a deer, they eat part of it and then they cover it up and come back later to eat it again. And we found a deer that a lion had killed the night before. And it just so happens that Arizona Game and Fish is doing a research project. So we called the lion biologist. He came up, set a snare on the carcass. When the lion came back in that night to feed, he caught him. And so we got to help 46 years later. I got to help handle and collar another mountain lion, which was as incredible as it was 46 years ago. To me, it was just an amazing experience. So that was truly a lifelong dream that made itself all the way back around after 46 years to getting to do that again, and it was equally cool. It was just when we're finished, I'll send you some pictures. I'll send you a couple photographs of us with the lion, but it was really neat. So that was my very first experience working with carnivores, which was, like I said, 1979. And I've always wanted to work on carnivores and been interested in carnivores. But, I think one of the things, and I taught at a college in Ohio for 12 years in a wildlife program. And one of the things I always told my students, and I think this is really important, is, they would come in the door, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And I was like, by all means, have those goals, but take any job that comes along that's going to help you get closer to those goals, because all the experience adds up and it all makes a difference. And if you pigeonhole yourself and say, I only want to work on cats or I only want to work on bobcats, um, it tends to cause you to miss opportunities, I think. That jobs are few and far between in wildlife. And that said, most people that I know that stuck with it end up getting a job, but it may not be exactly that perfect job. In my case, to be able to do what I wanted to do, because I went full circle. I've done a lot of different jobs in wildlife and worked on several different species. But to get back to cat work, all of the work that we did in Tucson was volunteer. We were all retired. I found out about that bobcat population from a friend who was a graduate student when I was many years ago, and I happened to run into her in 2009 in New Mexico, and she told me about the Tucson urban bobcat population, and I was so enthralled at that point in time that I just had it in my mind, I want to do that work someday. And it ended up being, 2009. We started in 2020, so it was 11 years later that I ended up coming back to Arizona. And really, much of the reason I came back was to be able to do that work. Um, and I reached out to retirees. We were all retired. We're all retired Arizona Game and Fish people. And our whole team was made up of retired biologists. So we didn't get paid, but what an amazing experience. Truly, truly a remarkable experience to get to work with not only bobcats. I did some bobcat work in Ohio prior to that, but to work on urban bobcats, it was just amazing. I learned so much. I would not have traded that experience, even though we were in the city and it was just such a different experience. I wouldn't have traded it for anything because I learned so much about people and bobcats and, how it's possible for species to live peacefully together, even when there's conflict.
Can you describe how did your career develop?
So I knew I wanted to work with wildlife, and I grew up in Ohio, but I wanted to be in the Western United States, and I had family in the West, and so I picked Arizona State University. That's where I got my bachelor's degree. And the you know very typically the first year or even the first 2 years are all of your general subjects, and it was the second semester of my sophomore year that I got to take my first wildlife class, which was incredibly exciting. Um, Thankfully, that has changed now. A lot of times you get an immersion experience much earlier in your academic career so that you get a feel for, are you in the right place? You know, in my case, it was the end of my second year before I got to take a wildlife class and took a job as a summer student, which I already talked about. And that was, you know, I didn't know anything. I was so lucky because one of the greatest gifts in our profession, I think, is mentorship. I had people who mentored me, one of which was the very first biologist I worked for, um, Harley Shaw, who I still am in contact with. Actually, just sent him an email this morning and told him the mountain lion story because that's who I was with 46 years ago. Um, but then took a summer job every summer that I was in school. I worked for Game and Fish for 3 more summers after that because, you know, that was really exactly what I wanted to do. And then I was really lucky because Harley, just in passing, gave me the name of a person who was the leader of the Rocky Mountain Forest and Range Experiment Station in Tempe at Arizona State University. And so that is the research branch of the U.S. Forest Service. So that's a federal Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture here in the United States. He gave me this person's name and said, you know, you need to just go introduce yourself to him. Maybe he can help you. They have an office on campus. So I did. I went and, you know, knocked on his door and introduced myself and told him that Harley Shaw had me his name and to see if he could hire me as a work study student as part of my financial aid. I could get work study. If he could hire me as work study, if not, if there was just something I could do as a volunteer to gain more experience. And that was the fall of 1979. And he hired me on the spot for 20 hours a week. And I worked there until I graduated. So I was incredibly lucky because, first of all, it got me through school because I put myself through school. So that was my income. But I got exposed to a lot of different kinds of research projects, and I got exposed to a federal agency versus a state agency. So one of the big choices that you have to make fairly early on in your career is a focus on, you know, who do I want to work with? Do I want to work for a wildlife game and fish department, which is a state agency, or the National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, all federal agencies that manage wildlife habitat primarily, and not so much the population management. And so I was really lucky because I had a job all summer. I worked for Game and Fish, and then in the winter I worked for the Forest Service in research projects. Not very much field work. Most of it was office related work, but I learned so much. I learned how to look at the scientific literature and do research and all of those things. And so when I graduated, I actually had, you know, experience that I could offer. And I ended up getting hired. I had worked on a black bear project for Game and Fish for 2 years, 2 summers. I worked on a black bear project for Game and Fish, and I got offered the opportunity to continue to work on that project and get my master's degree at the same time, which was I knew I wanted to get a master's degree because by then I had made the decision that I thought I would like to do research. That was what my focus was. And so I was able to stay on that black bear project as an assistant and get my master's degree at the same time for 3 years. And that was working with bears, almost as good as working with cats, but not quite. If you're a cat person like I am. Um, and, and so I did that for 3 years. And then that took me to 1983 and I got hired by the Arizona Game and Fish Department in a full-time position. Prior to that, I was just working seasonals and whatnot, but getting my master's at the same time. So going to school and I got hired by Arizona Game and Fish and in the education branch. And there was a new program that had just come online called Project Wild. And that was a program specifically written by educators and wildlife biologists as a team and meant to give teachers tools that they could use in their classroom to teach kids about wildlife and to use wildlife as an example. And I loved that job. I learned so much. Teachers are so amazing, and I learned so much. There is no more enthusiastic group of people to work with than educators. It was a wonderful experience. I did that job for about 3.5 years. I got a phone call from the person who had hired me into the Forest Service position. His name's Dr. Dave Patton, and he had gone on to Northern Arizona University at that time and was putting together a wildlife program and asked me to come there and work with him on a Miriam's Wild Turkey project. And I took a leave of absence from Game and Fish and went and worked with Dave for 3 years on a turkey project, which was also amazing since I wasn't a bird person at all. But turkeys are in their own class when it comes to birds. And I did that for 3 years and then went back to Game and Fish and uh, back into the education branch and continued to do that for about another 3 years. And then at that point in time, we moved to southeastern Ohio, and I ended up taking a job. I love to teach. That was one of the things I found out. So the education job, there are no better teachers than teachers as far as teaching you how to be a good educator. And I love doing that. So I took a job in a wildlife program, and it was a really neat at a place called Hocking College. It's a technical college, 2-year wildlife degree, which is very rare in the United States. Almost always require at least a 4-year degree. But I loved it. It was very hands-on. The kids were immersed in outdoors and wildlife related activities almost from day one. It's a great model. Um, it's a great model for education as far as I'm concerned, for wildlife education. And while I was there, I worked very hard. My students at the end of 2 years were such incredibly good field students. They learned so many good field skills that my focus was to help them go on, get an additional 2 years, get their 4-year degree, and then go from there because the combination of the skills that they learned at Hocking combined with the higher level education aspects made it just almost a perfect. I felt like the student who came out was so much stronger than I ever was with the education that I got at Arizona State. And I loved Arizona State, but it was a typical wildlife program. So I did that for 12 years actually. And that was an amazing job. I really, really enjoyed that. And then left that job and actually came back to Arizona and have retired ended up retiring both from the Arizona Game and Fish because I ended up with 12 years there and then also 12 years from Hocking College.
Cheryl, is there a standard book that is ideal for students to read on bobcats?
There is a book that was actually written by a man named Kevin Hansen, and it's available on it's widely available. And he did a really good job of covering everything about bobcats, and it's called Bobcat Master of Survival. The research information ends up being in the scientific literature or in the technical literature. So, but if you go to Google Scholar and type in, bobcats, there will be a lot of publications will pop up.
Cheryl, what about the conference circuit? Are there any societies or associations students should be looking to join in order to follow the conferences on bobcats?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Our professional organization is the Wildlife Society, and their website is wildlife.org. So they're very easy to find. And that's really our professional organization for wildlife people, and that's all wildlife people, all aspects. There is a group that in North America that's specific to cats, and that's called the Wild Field Association. And I really encourage people to get involved because those are all the people who are actually working on cats across a variety of positions, and also go down into Central and South America where we pick up, a plethora of wildcats that we don't have in North America. So I'm a big fan of the Wild Field Association. They put out a really, really good newsletter. It's very inexpensive to join. And yeah, super, super good group. I've been involved with them for a while, and I'm part of their newsletter committee, and I've written some articles about the research that I've done as well.
Oh, that's
Those are the two best that I can think of.
now, Cheryl. What are the skills that somebody needs to do what you do with Bobcats?
First of all, an understanding, I think probably the most important skill, and this isn't just for working on bobcats, but you know, being able to access information and read scientific information and understand it is very important. And that's part of what you learn as an undergrad, and certainly as a graduate student, but that's part of it. As far as the field skills part, some general field skills, simply being able to take care of yourself, locate yourself. I used to always tell my students how important maps were. Of course, maps have changed now. We still use them, but we use them on our phone or we use them on our computer or whatever. But um, just an ability, just some basic practical things. It gets more specialized whenever, whatever species you're working on. In that, if you're working in a capture situation, probably one of the most skilled parts of our profession has to do with catching animals, doing it safely, handling them safely. Right? It's very important for people to understand that you're always building on what has come before. That's what science is. It's always, you have to start with an understanding of what we know, and then you start to ask those questions about, okay, what other information do we need? So that basic willingness to listen to other people, learn from other people. In my case, I had not done bobcat capture work before, so I had a person, another retiree from Game and Fish, who's very good at catching bobcats, and he was the person that taught me how to do that. I have since taught other people how to do that. So part of it is, that's very important. Sharing information, a willingness within our profession to share information with other people. Radio telemetry skills. I've done a lot of radio telemetry over the years. These particular, and much of the work we do now has to do with satellite radio collars, which is a much different way of looking at things. But there are still situations where we are out in the field tracking an animal. I was locating, for instance, kitten dens. When they have their kittens, they hide them for about 6 weeks. And both projects that I've done in Ohio really focused on where do they have their kittens, because what we found out was that they're lacking in den sites because of the timber harvest activities and because of the way that we manage our forests. They were lacking in what would have been their natural den sites. And so that was important information. So those skills are important. And then, just communication. And, that sounds like such it's kind of one of those things we all fall back on, but it is so important. The Bobcats in Tucson project, I think I've always communicated, always been willing to give programs, both professional and to the general public. But with the Bobcats in Tucson program, it was so high profile that it was the communication aspects of it. Like I said, it ended up being a study as much about people as it was about bobcats. So it wasn't a situation where I could say, oh, I'm a scientist. I'm not going to tell you anything about this until this 4-year study is done. From day one, we were interacting with people on an individual basis, on a group basis. The website, the bobcatsintucson.net, interestingly enough, you started via COVID, and we did not have plans to have a website for the project. We wanted to get opinions from people and assess where there were issues. Part of the goal of this study was to help mitigate conflict and provide Arizona Game and Fish with information about how to help people live more easily with bobcats and other wildlife in general, but carnivores as well. And because of COVID, our original plan was within a neighborhood where we had a radio collar bobcat, we would be working with people, going to doors, asking them to take a survey. And of course, with COVID, that went out the window. And we started in the fall of 2020. So we literally, umbrellaed COVID. And so the website in reality ended up being an incredible boon for us because we still have a couple thousand people a month that are going to the bobcatsintucson.net website. So and they have a way to contact us. So within the website, as you found, there is an email that people can reach out to us directly. I still, even though the study's finished, our final reports are finished, I still correspond almost daily with people in Tucson who are either reporting bobcat sighting or activity or have a concern or a question. So that was a very different skill set for me to learn. I've always been willing to communicate with people, but it was much different when you have someone who said, I have this bobcat in my backyard. I don't want it here. Come get it and move it, take it someplace else. And, or, or what can I do to get rid of it? Or, so on and so forth. So I think above all, maybe, a willingness to always stand back and appreciate what it is we're doing when we're getting to work with wildlife. Because I do think that while it is a job that we get paid for, it's also, a gift to be in this particular situation. Worked from a place of gratitude in my profession, and I still do. I think even more so now, the older I get. I've just been really lucky to have jobs. Even though I've had a lot of different kinds of jobs, I've loved all of my jobs in wildlife. I've never been in a situation, where I wasn't feeling like I was making a difference for wildlife. And that was why I started down this path 40 some years ago. Still hard to believe it's been that long.
Cheryl, for somebody who wants to be you, do they need just a first degree, a bachelor's degree, or do you need a master's degree as well, or even a PhD?
Yeah, so most researchers, whether they're at the federal or state level, or obviously if they're at the university level, they have a PhD. Most researchers have at least a master's degree. If you're an assistant, you don't usually have to have a master's degree, but if you're the project biologist, then a master's degree. Some people have PhDs, some don't. The hardest part in wildlife, and you have experience, so I don't have to probably tell you this, is just simply getting hired to start with. That master's degree may give you some extra points towards getting an interview, if nothing else. What you learn to do with a master's degree is research. First of all, do anything you can do, volunteer, do any activity that's provided to you when you're in school. And what I always told my students was, in this time of your life, there's nothing more important. If you want to get a job with wildlife, you have to maintain that focus. take what jobs come along until you can focus and know what job you want. I had friends that were engineers and they walked out the door with $100,000 a year job. Learn what it takes to be a professional person, how to present yourself. All of those things are really important.
Cheryl, for a student who is perhaps at that critical stage of their studies where they're thinking, gosh, what project can I do? Where do our knowledge gaps lie with bobcats?
I think that there will continue to be questions about how they can interact in urban environments and how they raise their kittens and where they raise their kittens. Because if you don't have successful reproduction, you're not going to have a population over the long term. And so, where do they den? Where do they have their kittens? We're in the midst of that. Our kittens here in our females in Ohio are having kittens right now, as are our females in Arizona, for that matter. And so, to me, that was a very important aspect of it. Is how do they what we found in Ohio was den sites were lacking. There was, uh, they used historically, they probably were cavity nesters in trees. So if you had a big enough tree, they would climb up the tree, get down in a hollow cavity, and that's where they would have and raise their kittens. Very, very safe place because just like domestic cats, for the first 8 weeks of their life, they're pretty helpless. They're really very vulnerable, and she takes care of, with just a few exceptions, female cats, wildcats, take care of their young by themselves. So the male is not involved. And in fact, the males will kill kittens that aren't theirs. What's called infanticide. And so that initial place that she has to put those kittens is profoundly important. If she can't secure them, she's hunting and they're gone 18 hours out of 24 hours, they're gone hunting uh, because she's feeding herself. She's also nursing the kittens. And so that initial den site selection is critical for her. And I think originally they probably, and there is actually the Iberian lynx, which is a fascinating, very sad, but fascinating story. If you're interested, you can look it up. But the Iberian lynx actually had their kittens in cork bark oak trees of all things, which there are very, very few of that are left that are large enough for her to do that.
Cheryl, you
It's a
are
pleasure.
a research biologist, a wildlife biologist with bobcats in Tucson. Thank you so much for being on the Practical Animal Channel, Cheryl Mollohan.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you for doing this. It's a wonderful resource for students, absolutely for everyone for that matter. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks a lot. Bye bye now.
Okay, it was great to meet you.